Okay, so Chris Shelton will be our speaker today. Scientology, the history and future of a destructive cult. Like many of us, his family got him into a religion, and many of us, same way. We grew up either Catholic or Baptist or whatever because we didn't know any better at the time, and it seemed like the parents knew what they were talking about, so that's what you did. So he spent 25 long years in this cult, and he is now going to share that experience with you, which I think is going to be very interesting to you because it is quite an organization, and based on money, as many of them are actually. It's not just Scientology, but we all know their businesses, I think. Many of us do. He has a book out now, of course, and I started reading it. I would suggest you get a copy of it back there. He'll be signing the books after his talk, and so you might look forward to that. He has a blog and he has a YouTube, and on one of them he's got on the YouTube he's got Critical Thinker at Large. So he is broken away from his indoctrination. And he quotes this quote, "These are the insidious monsters in our heads making us do ourselves in." He will share with us now that experience, and give Chris a big hand.
On here, there we go. Hey everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me, having me out here. It's always fun to get out and sort of talk about the experience of what my life was. So Scientology is a big subject. There's no way we're going to cover all of it in an hour, but I'm going to try to give you a sense of the experience of it. First, I'd like to ask, has anybody here seen the HBO documentary, Alex Gibney's Going Clear? Yes. Okay, good. Or any other documentaries or videos or anything about Scientology? Some yes, some no. Okay. Just want to kind of get a sense of what you guys know about it already, so I don't want to cover ground you've already covered. Let me start with myself, just so you know who I am and why I have any credibility standing here talking to you about this. My parents got involved with Scientology when I was very young, when I was about 2 or 3 years old. And they had actually gotten divorced. And so we would, separate households and that sort of thing. And my uncle actually got my dad involved. And they did the beginning introductory services. Scientology is a church. It is a recognized religion in the United States and in many other countries in the world. But it follows a kind of a business model more than a church, in that it offers classes and counseling. And it offers those things for fixed donation rates. So if you go into the Church of Scientology of Phoenix and say, what do I do? They're going to say, well, you're going to do a class, or you're going to do our counseling services, and you're going to pay us a donation for that. And what they have is a series of services. Then they put this together as an analogy of a bridge from one's current spiritual state of awareness, as we all are now, to this higher state of awareness and ability as a spiritual being, because the Church of Scientology says that you, me, all of us are spirits. We're spiritual beings. And the word that they use for that is a thetan, from the Greek letter theta. So that's the term that they use for that. And so we're all thetans. You don't have a thetan. It's not like you have a soul. You are a thetan. That's the idea. And Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard claimed that through his discoveries and researches, he not only proved that man is a spiritual being, which he didn't really, but I'm just telling you what they say, that he proved this and could show you through subjective experience that this is true, and that through the processes of Dianetics and Scientology, your spiritual awareness and ability will improve and increase so that you sort of, they don't put it in this term, but the best way to describe it simply to you is so you will attain a godlike status and state. That's sort of the carrot that is offered by Scientology in an ultimate sense. They don't explain all this to you on day one. I'm kind of giving you the real deal on it, right? And what they tell you when you first walk in is, well, is there something about your life you'd like to change or improve? Whether it be, your marriage is not so great, or you're not dealing with your kids, or maybe you have work problems, or maybe you're introverted, or you have a hard time communicating with people, or whatever it is that you feel you want to change or improve about yourself. I think there's very few people in the world who think that their life is totally great, everything's wonderful, and I don't need anything. And for those people who do think that, they're never going to get involved in Scientology, because Scientology is never going to be able to sort of hook them in. But the hook that they get people in with is there something you want to change or improve? With my parents, getting back to that, they were divorced. Obviously, that was not a happy thing with little me, running around. And my dad thought that his communication could stand some improvement. And he was kind of an angry guy and this kind of thing. And so he thought maybe this would be something that could help him. And one of the very first services Scientology offers is a communications course. And that's what it's called, the communications course. And tons of people who got into Scientology did so through that course. And it offers a series of practical drills and some theoretical information about how communication goes and how you could improve it. So when you talk to people, you look them in the eye and you speak and they hear you. And when somebody says something to you, you answer them. I mean, it's kind of common sense stuff. But it's all put together in this class, and when you do the class, you go, wow, I really feel like I can communicate better. This L. Ron Hubbard really knows what he's talking about. This is good stuff, right? And then they go, well, that's just the beginning. We got a whole lot more where that came from, right? That's just the tip of the iceberg. And you go, really? And they go, oh, yes. And that's how my parents got involved, right? My dad actually wrangled my mom in. She did the communications course. They then did some counseling together. Scientology offers a kind of marriage counseling. And they got back together. And they got remarried. And so I, being yay tall at the time, was just kind of, I didn't have a family, now I have a family, right? And with parents. And so my entire childhood I was raised with these ideas and principles of Dianetics and Scientology. There's a lot of terminology. There's a lot of loaded language, is what it's called, really, in this subject. And when you're raised with that, just like if you're raised as a Christian or a Catholic or Buddhist or whatever, this is how life is. I mean, it wasn't my place to question this information or think, well, Dad, there's no such thing as a reactive mind. Like that didn't occur to me when I was 6 years old. So I just kind of grew up around this, and all of, as my parents got involved with it, we lived in California. This was in Pasadena, California. As my parents got more and more involved in it, they started working for the church in Pasadena. And my dad actually ended up heading up the Pasadena organization there. This was in the mid-1970s. So all of our friends were Scientologists, right? So we had to have parties at home and Scientologists, right? My childhood friends who weren't from school, who I met non-Scientology people at school, but the children of the Scientologists, they were the people I was hanging around with, right? So it was a kind of a bubble world a bit, right? That everybody accepted that L. Ron Hubbard was a genius. This is how he's viewed in Scientology. He's not worshipped. There isn't some kind of to L. Ron Hubbard, but it's a reverence. There's a reverence towards the man, and he's definitely considered a genius amongst a giant amongst geniuses. People in Scientology think that L. Ron Hubbard was a guy, but he was a superior, gifted, amazing guy who did things and accomplished things and learned things that no one else in history ever have learned, right? And so there's a lot of credence given to his words. It's one of the things in Scientology that L. Ron Hubbard is kind of infallible. If there's something that he gave thousands of lectures, he wrote about 20, 25 books. In all that material, if you are studying it in the classrooms of Scientology and there's something you disagree with, or you go, well, that doesn't make any sense, the teachers, the supervisors who work with you will work you over until you understand it so it makes sense to you, right? Because it's not that L. Ron Hubbard doesn't make sense. It's not that this doesn't make sense. It's not that this isn't 1,000% true. It's you ain't getting it, right? And you're going to be worked over until you do get it. And I actually did that job for quite a while. So then there's a whole methodology to it. Okay, so that was kind of my upbringing. And when I was 15 years old, it was sort of like my parents were doing the Scientology. I wasn't doing it, but I was around it, right? Until I was 15. We had moved up to a place called Santa Maria, California, which was about an hour north of Santa Barbara. And one fine day in the summer between my sophomore and junior years of high school, my dad says, why don't you go down to the church and find out what it is for yourself, right? I go, well, okay, that sounds reasonable. So a guy that my dad was working with at the company that they had started was driving down to Santa Barbara on a regular basis, and so I went down with him one day, expecting that I was kind of blasé about it. I was 15. I was kind of like, yeah, I'm a teenage boy, right? Like, your parents aren't going to really teach you a whole lot when you're 15. And but I thought, well, okay, I'll go down and check it out. And I figured it was going to take about 15 minutes, and I'd kind of be done, and that was that. But what they do, and this is kind of, and I think you'll find this interesting, is they have a personality test. And this is one of the most common ways that they draw people in. It's 200 questions, yes, no, or sort of maybe. And the questions are things like, do you browse through railway timetables or dictionaries or phone books just for pleasure? That's one of the answer questions, right? Or do you find yourself worrying about needless worries often? Right? And you're kind of like, well, yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Right? And you answer these questions, and there are all kinds of crazy questions like that. They're very kind of general, sort of, some of them are very ambiguous questions. And what you get from that is a graph of your personality. And one of the traits on the graph is happy, sad. One of the traits on it is in communication or withdrawn, right? Sort of an introversion, extroversion thing. Or responsible, not so responsible, right? And these various traits. And they put it all on a graph, and it's called the Oxford Capacity Analysis. Never had anything to do with Oxford, but it sounds really good. And you get this very scientific-looking graph, right? And pseudoscience is a really big part of Scientology. I'll just say that right now. And this graph is one of these things. But you look at it and you go, wow. And they then sit down with you, and the test evaluator goes over with you this graph. Now, the whole point of this is not that this is a scientifically accurate analysis of your personality, which changes day to day, by the way, because if you take the test every day, you'll get a different graph every day, depending on what mood you're in. But the idea with this is to get you talking, get you to open up. You tell them, what is it that you want to change or improve about your life? What are your fears? What are your anxieties? What are your concerns and upsets? And once you open up like that, and the person who's doing the test evaluation with you is usually pretty good looking, usually very open, smiles, very easy to talk to, and very practiced in this. And the idea is to establish trust, so that you'll open up to them and tell them some secret of yours or something about yourself that you wouldn't necessarily just tell in a social conversation. And by doing so, and by opening yourself up to that, you then say, okay, this is something I'm now going to trust you with. Like my marriage isn't going so great. I go, I totally get it. It's not uncommon at all. But guess what? We have something that we can offer you here that will handle that. Not make it a little bit better, not maybe sort of make your life a little better with that. No, we're going to make that problem absolutely vanish from your life. Scientology's that good, right? And you go, really? And they go, oh yeah. And it's usually $50, $100. It's not that much. It's not that big of a deal to do one of the very first services. For me, when I was 15, I walk in there. Well, I was kind of a nerdy kid. Never had a date. Had a hard time talking to girls. This was I was in high school, right? And I kind of had dorky-looking glasses. I dressed funny, and so it really didn't take a whole lot of work for her to figure me out, right? But being 15 years old and thinking that I knew things and nobody else did, I was amazed that she read me like a book, right? She sits me down, the communication is out the bottom, right? And she goes, wow, you look like you're having a hard time talking to girls. And I'm like, what? How did you know that, right? That's impossible that you could, how could you possibly know that about me, right? And then when she put the cap on it of, well, we have a class that you can take that will deal with that, I just about fell out of my chair. Like, what? Because nobody offers this kind of thing to you in the real big wide world. And my parents had been involved with this, so there was already a mindset in my head that there was validity to this. So I wasn't just coming in off the street cold. So I was like, well, I got to sign up for that course right now, right? So I call my dad, I got to do this right now, right? And we arranged it and figured it all out. And before too long, I was taking their communications class, and then I was taking their study class, and then I was taking their basics of Scientology class, and then I was taking their ethics class, and then I was taking a class about how to use that e-meter, the electropsychometer, right? And all these classes, and then I did this thing called the Purification Rundown. And by this time, I was graduated from high school. This took me 2 years to get through all this stuff, and going down there fairly regularly. And then I did this Purification Rundown, which is sitting in the sauna for 5 hours a day, detoxing. Total nonsense, complete pseudoscience, and I've actually done an entire video breaking it all down. But within the world of Scientology, they really think that drug toxins and LSD and this kind of thing stay in your body. Hubbard asserted this with great deal of authority. And so Scientologists will sit in a sauna for 5 hours a day, day after day after day after day, taking mega doses of vitamins and flushing out these toxins, right? Which is not even what's going on, but that's what they think is going on. So I did that, and I didn't really have a big drug history or anything, so it only took me about 5 or 6 days, and I finished it. And you kind of do some exercise and get up and about and sit in a sauna and sweat for a while, and you can kind of have a nice physical reaction to that initially, which is what I had. So I thought, hey, wow, I feel great. And they said, great. Now that you're done with high school and you've only gone to college for 3 weeks and you really don't know what you're going to do with your life, you should join staff here and work for us and save the world. And there is nothing more dangerous to the world than a young person who thinks they're going to save it. So I, of course, signed up. Duked it out with my parents because while they were Scientologists, they had done the staff thing, and they kind of knew the organization was a little, maybe had some things to be not so great about it. But they relented. They signed the contract, because you sign a legal binding contract that you will work for the church for a period of 2.5 or 5 years, and in exchange for that, the church will give you free Scientology services. You give your whole life. And I did that for 8 years, actually, at the Santa Barbara Church of Scientology. And I did executive work. I did course work where I supervised people in classes. That was mostly what I did. And then I sort of supervised as an executive all of the counseling and class work. And that was a struggle, because when you work for the Church of Scientology, when you sign that legally binding contract, you are a religious volunteer. Church of Scientology is a 501c3, tax-exempt, nonprofit organization officially, while it's raking in billions of dollars through its services. But the staff are not the ones who see that money. All the money goes up. It doesn't come back down. Within the organizational structure of Scientology, I mean, right? So you have its upper levels, which is where L. Ron Hubbard was initially, When he died in '86, David Miscavige officially took over the church, and he's been leading it ever since. He's a bit of a tyrant, and his life is very well taken care of by all that money. But the staff of Scientology are considered religious volunteers, not employees. There's no bennies, there's no 501, or there's no 401k, there's no set salary, none of that. The money that you get working for the Church of Scientology as a staff member at, say, the Phoenix Church, or the one in Santa Barbara where I worked, or the one in Milano or New York, those religious volunteers are paid a proportionate percentage of the income that the church makes that week. So if in Santa Barbara, let's say we had a week where we only made, $3,000 of income, we got about $1 for pay that week, right? That was how the percentages worked out. The most I ever got paid in a 1-week period for when I was working in Santa Barbara was about $150. So for 8 years, I struggled because obviously you're not going to make a living doing that. So I was working, but they demand that you work full-time, and all the policies and things that Hubbard wrote for the staff say, look, it's a proportionate pay system. If you guys put the work in and make it succeed, you'll get paid lots of money, and I want you to get paid lots of money, and so this is how this should work. But that's not how it works. But you're kind of in this bubble world again, where Scientology is, you've been convinced as a public person, as a person who's doing services, that this stuff really works. It's really great. You've had a subjective experience or two with it where you feel like this is really something important and great. And now we're going to take it to the level of saving the world. And, of course, and I have to say, as somebody who grew up in it, and then as a 17-year-old getting recruited into it as a staff member, critical thinking wasn't in the picture, right? Life experience wasn't in the picture. And that's where a lot of the Scientologists that are still around, that's when they came in, and that's how they came in. My story is not unique. Right, the college-age students, high school-age students, more college level really is where a ton of Scientologists mostly came from as their initial demographic back in the 60s and 70s, right? So now they're, they're kind of older. You have second-generation, third-generation Scientologists, and that's kind of how it's sort of sustaining itself. So again, critical thinking not being a big part of the picture, it wasn't really in my head to question what was going on. I didn't have any other frame of reference. And a lot of Scientologists don't. And when you buy into this kind of a belief system that you are an immortal spiritual being, you've been around for a near infinite period of time in the past, and you will continue to live into the future forever, what's one lifetime? Nah, we're making some sacrifices. It's no big deal because we're saving the world, right? So you just kind of go with it. And Hubbard says over and over again that in the policies of the church, and this is reinforced over and over again, that the success of the church is on your shoulders. It's on you, right? So there's the idea becomes if it's not succeeding and not making it, it's not Hubbard's fault. It's not the organization's fault. Guess whose fault it is? So after 8 years of this, I was working a full-time job outside of the church. Then I'm working 40 hours a week at the church. So my life was weekend nights only, was kind of my only time off to do my laundry, do my shopping, and kind of chill. The rest of the time I was working, and I was very dedicated, right? This is going to work. I'm going to save the world. And so when I was 25, I said, this isn't working, right? Santa Barbara's not expanding. Scientology's not expanding the way it should be. I mean, come on, guys, this is the stuff, this is it. And so I decided I needed to do more, not less. And, and you look at it now and you go, wow, what a foolish thought. But at the time, it really made sense, right? So I joined the SEA organization, and that's S-E-A. SEA is an ocean, the SEA organization. And that is the core clergy heart of Scientology. It's about 5,000 people worldwide, and it is the group that is living, breathing Scientology 24/7. It's a paramilitary organization. They model themselves after the Navy. And there's a lot of history to this, which I really don't have the time to get into today with everything I want to cover, but Hubbard created it in the mid-60s, and it was sort of his own little navy, and it was sort of the most dedicated Scientologists, and they assign a symbolic, but for them, real idea of a billion-year contract. It's obviously not legally binding. It's a symbolic thing. But you pledge 1 billion years of service to Scientology. I'm going to do this lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, and we're going to make this happen, right? Because Scientologists at the core level really do believe that they're going to salvage planet Earth, right? They're going to save mankind. They're going to rid the world of insanity, war, and criminality. They're going to do away with those things. Just like you would do away with your communication problems or your marriage problems. Same kind of thing, but it's on a planetary scale. And then they're going to go off and they're going to do it to another planet and another one until the entire universe is been brought the message of Scientology, right? That's the idea. That's the really hardcore thinking. Of course, like I said, none of this is given to you on day one at all. You build up to this, right? I'm just kind of dumping it on you guys. They would never tell you all this stuff if you just walked into the Phoenix church on day one and said, what are you guys doing here? You know, they'll talk to you about your marriage problems or something. So I joined the Sea Organization, which means I moved to Los Angeles. And many of you might have seen the big blue buildings with the Scientology sign on it. This is a common picture that you see. It's a base. It was the Cedars-Sinai Hospital that was purchased by the church in the mid-70s. They painted all the buildings blue so it would stand out more. They put a big Scientology sign on the top of the highest building of it, and that base is called a Sea Org base, right? Like a military base. And I worked there for 17 years until December of 2012, which is when I finally got out. And I did a whole bunch of stuff. I was an executive over all of the delivery of Scientology across the Western United States. Organizationally, they have a church management body, and that management body is the Sea Organization. That's part of what the Sea Organization does. Another thing that the Sea Organization does is it delivers all of the confidential, upper-level, secret stuff of Scientology. That's entrusted to the Sea Org. You wouldn't go down to Phoenix and get the goods on, if any of you watch South Park or know anything about the whole Xenu story, that's the upper-level confidential stuff where, you know, it gets back into old 76 trillion years ago, planet Earth was, a bunch of atomic bombs were dropped here and a bunch of people were dropped here, and this is why we're all stuck in bodies here now, is because this is all super highly confidential information in Scientology, but you can watch it on South Park. And you can find all this stuff on the internet. And like I said, it's a very detailed thing, so I can't even pretend to give you all of it in one go. But there are confidential upper-level scriptures in Scientology, just like there are, say, in the Mormon Church, right? Only so many people can go in the temple, and when you go in there, you're sworn to secrecy. It's kind of the same thing in Scientology. Only in Scientology, you pay a lot of money to get there, a lot. And just to answer that question right now, to get to the highest levels of Scientology, you can expect to pay somewhere between $500,000, $750,000, $1 million over the course of your time in Scientology. You can expect to mortgage your house once or twice or 3 times, get credit cards, max them out over and over again, and basically be raped and pillaged for anything and everything you've got money-wise, because it's all about money is what it's really all about. But I'm telling you about the beliefs and various things here. So I joined the Sea Organization, and I did that for 17 years, and I was very hardcore. I was the believer of believers, and I really, really studied a lot of L. Ron Hubbard's materials. I very passionately believed in it, and I really did think that what we were doing was important. And I'm not going to say that it was all a waste of time, because it really wasn't. Over 25 years, I salvaged marriages. I did get people off drugs. I did do good work. You don't do something like that for 25 years if you're not getting something out of it. But it's a nuanced conversation, because while there was benefit and while there was good work done, the proportion of totalitarian, authoritarian kind of control that Scientology exerts on you, the amount of invasiveness into your life, even at a public level, much less when you're hardcore working for it all the time, is too much, way, way, way too much. And it is not something that the benefits are not worth the cost, right? So I just want to say that right now. So as a Sea Org member, I got paid about $40 a week, right? It's a salary position, and and that was what I was getting. Your room and board is taken care of. You are uniformed. You are given a place to live. I got married. We had a room, not a house, not an apartment, a room. In fact, it was in this building that's on the cover of my book. This building is the birthing building for the Sea Org members in Los Angeles. And so that's where I lived. And I worked right across the street. I got up in the morning. We would have 3 musters every day where we would all get together, roll call, and count for everybody, make sure nobody took off in the middle of the night, which sometimes happened. And there was a security force there keeping an eye on us just as much as they're keeping an eye on the criminals of Los Angeles. And it's a very policed activity, right? And in the Los Angeles base, there aren't barbed wire fences, but there are at the international base over in San Jacinto in Hemet, California. And some of the more gruesome stories you might have heard about Scientology or will hear about them come from that location in Hemet. That's where David Miscavige lives, and that is where the central authority of Scientology is located, and that's where a lot of very, very abusive behavior happened. But while I was in the Sea Organization, I was assaulted physically. I had spent 3 years on a rehabilitation program called the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, which is where you go if you're a Sea Org member and you've screwed up in such a way that they are really pissed at you. And I did 3 years of that, got through that program, and that was a rough go. I'm actually going to write a whole nother book about that because it's kind of a whole experience in itself. And I continued on with the church until 2012 when I finally realized one day the thing that hit me. I'd had years of troubles and things that I saw organizationally that didn't really make a lot of sense to me, bureaucracy and politics and stuff like that, which happens in any group. And I thought, this isn't really going the way I thought it was going to go. But the thing that actually hit me one day, and this is important, is I was doing, in the last years that I was working for the Sea Org and for the church, I was recovering people back into the church who had sort of drifted off, right? Public people. Like I'd go to Phoenix, or I'd go to Twin Cities, Minnesota, or I'd go to Orange County, California, and I would go knocking door to door. Hey, you used to be doing Scientology and now you're not, and you have money still that you paid to us for services and you never did them, and we want you to come back in and get involved and be part of this. We're saving the world, come on. And I realized one day that in order to succeed at that job and get people back in, or in order to recruit people to be staff members like I was, I had to lie to them more than tell them the truth. I had to give them the impression that you could make money as a staff member, that you could get time off, that you could be given the time to do Scientology services. Because the 17 years that I was in the Sea Organization, I did not move 1 inch across that bridge of services. I'd spent 17 years, and all I did was classes and training for my job, but I never did any actual Scientology. And believe me, yes, I was a martyr, and I knew it, right? But after 17 years, it was getting a little tiring. So I thought, here I am pitching all of the advantages and emphasizing all the good things, yet that's not really my life. And that's not really the life of people I see around me. All the staff members in Twin Cities, Minnesota were slaving away. They weren't moving up the bridge. They weren't getting courses. Their lives weren't any better as a result of Scientology, and yet there they were doing the same thing I'd been doing in Santa Barbara for all those years. And I went, wow. It just hit me out one day. I was like, holy, wow, I'm actually lying to people. I'm telling them things that aren't really true. That's not why I signed up. That's not why I'm doing this. That's never was part of my idea of what I should be doing with my life. And I thought, I got to stop this. I got to leave the Sea organization, but I still believed in Scientology. I still believed L. Ron Hubbard had hit on something really important, and so I wanted to now take part of it. And so, and of course, as a Sea Org member, because you're so dedicated, because you're 24/7, because you're working and slaving so much, you don't get to have kids. There's no, Sea Org members are forbidden to have kids. If you have kids, they kick you out. And I thought, well, I want a family. I want to do this. You know, I was like 42 or something at that point, and I was like, yeah, I got it. It's time. I was kind of, maybe I was hitting a midlife crisis or something, right? But I thought, okay, it's time for me to make a change. And I left the Sea organization. It took me 9 months to go through all the procedures and follow all the things they want you to do in order to leave and still be in good standing with the church. You can just get up and go anytime you want, but they're not going to be very happy with you, and they're not going to let you continue doing Scientology if you do that. And I wanted to continue. So I followed all their rules, did all their procedures, and I left in December 2012. And I moved to Minnesota, and then I got on the internet. And when you're like all destructive cults or high control groups, Scientology does not want you learning about it through anything other than the works of L. Ron Hubbard. So, or what the church's propaganda is, right? So they don't want you listening to ex-members. They don't want you getting the inside story. They don't want you knowing what really goes on behind the closed doors. So I was kind of forbidden, as were all Scientologists, from going on the internet and watching South Park. I'd never watched South Park. I'd never seen any of this stuff. I didn't know anything, really, about Scientology other than what I had been being fed by Scientology over all those years. So, going down the rabbit hole of the internet, right, was quite the shocking experience, because I found out that Scientology was not at all what I thought it was, right? In terms of L. Ron Hubbard had not graduated college, had not been one of the first successful graduates of the first atomic physics classes in George Washington University back in the day, as he claimed. He had not been wounded in battle. He had not taken on Japanese subs off the coast of Oregon. He had not, been in Australia, been the first ranking officer in World War II in Australia to take on the Japs. I mean, none of that happened. And yet we were given this biography of L. Ron Hubbard, which was, that this man had spent his entire life dedicated to saving mankind and doing all these good works. And you find out, yeah, not so much, right? You found out he was married to 2 women at the same time for a period of a year. They didn't know about it, right? Each of the wives didn't know about each other. That was a little shocking. He had 3 wives overall over his entire lifetime. And it was funny, in one interview he was like, yeah, there was no second wife, something like that. It was kind of silly. But he was not the man he presented himself to be, and he was certainly not the man the church presented him to be. He was a man who was a writer. He wrote lots of pulp fiction, including science fiction, but also westerns, romance, detective, everything and anything he could write. He was the whiz kid. He was the speed demon at typing out and banging out stories. They weren't any good, but he did a lot of it. And he wrote through the Depression, and that was how he survived and made money. And he did have an imagination, and he was actually so imaginative in life that he made up all kinds of stories about himself to anybody and anybody who would listen. And people kind of picked up on it. When you read his biography from a man named Russell Miller, who wrote this in the 1980s, he was a British journalist. It's a book called Barefaced Messiah. And you get the real deal on Hubbard's life. You find out he was a bit of a pathological liar. That was how he conducted himself through his life. And he was a teller of tall tales. And some people believed it, and some people saw right through it. But that's how he conducted himself. And in the 1940s, after World War II, he was trying to convince the VA to give him a bigger pension than he deserved, and that he had war wounds and all this sort of thing. His claim was that he had been blinded and wounded in battle, and that he had used the research that he'd been doing independently of psychology and cells and neurology and this sort of thing, that he developed what became the techniques of Dianetics to cure himself of his blindness and his war wounds and his injuries. Well, when you find out that he was never really blind or injured in battle, and that the worst thing he suffered from was conjunctivitis and an ulcer, you go, oh, this really isn't based on what I thought it was based on, right? So that was what was that's what I learned going down the rabbit hole, I say, of the internet in 2013. And my world was rocked. And it's kind of, you know, there's some states of mind or emotional conditions you can get into that are a little hard to describe in single words. I mean, anger doesn't really go anywhere near how I felt. To have learned that I'd been basically taken advantage of for 25 years by an organization that was more concerned with making money than it was with really saving the world. And under the leadership of David Miscavige, which I could talk about for a long time, the church morphed. You know, Hubbard, you know, you can say a lot of things about L. Ron Hubbard, and I will, but he was a true believer. I actually do think that after having studied and looked at everything that I know about the guy, he really did believe in what he was saying, even though he was also a pathological liar and a con man. It's a complex situation, right? It's not really black and white with him. And there's lots of reasons I could tell you for why I think that. I mean, he really did practice Scientology on himself. And he did that for years, and that's one of the reasons I believe that he actually believed it. The current leader who took over after Hubbard died in '86, David Miscavige, is not a true believer, but he's running it as though he is. And so he talks the talk, looks like he walks the walk, but he doesn't, and he's just really morphed the church from a let's save the world sort of operation, which is what really appealed to a lot of idealism in the 60s and 70s and got a lot of people involved, to now being really pretty much just a pure money-making operation. And that was one of the other things that I watched happen in front of my eyes over the years, and I thought, something's wrong here. All this emphasis on money, 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 and the de-emphasizing of getting people through services and saving people's lives, I watched that happen over the course of time that I was involved in the church. And so I thought, yeah, something's not right here. And that's one of the reasons why I know David Miscavige is not a true believer, because if you were a true believer in Scientology, you would act and do, and things would be different. They would be conducted differently. So, 2013, I am livid at what has been done, what my life has been. And I start posting on the internet anonymously, right? There are people who come out of Scientology. There are people who come out of all destructive cults. You will find forums and message boards and websites for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, for ex-Mormons, for ex-Christians and Catholics and Gothard followers and all kinds of people. And you'll find ex-Scientology groups. You'll find Facebook groups. You'll find a website called the Ex-Scientology Message Board. And that was something I hit on pretty quickly, was the Ex-Scientology Message Board. It's run by an Australian ex-Scientologist who put this thing up. And lots of people go on there under anonymous names and post their experiences, their thoughts, their feelings about Scientology. And I discovered that and found kindred spirits, so to speak, right? I found people I could talk to about my experiences. But I had to be careful because I had a girlfriend who I wanted to marry. I had a fiance, actually. I'd asked her to marry me, who was a Scientologist, and she was working at the Church of Scientology in Twin Cities. Her whole family were Scientologists, right? And now here I was there with her, no longer in the Sea Org, but still professing to be a Scientologist, and yet I was finding out it was all bullshit, basically, right? So I was like, well, hell, what do I do now? Because I love this woman, and I like her family, and I've moved to Minnesota to be with her. What do I do? And at the same time, I was really pissed. And I'm a communicator. I'm a person who doesn't like to bottle up. So I started posting anonymously. You know, Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, David Muscat, rah, rah, rah. And I was venting, and I needed it. I mean, this was recovery therapy for me, the beginning of that. So I start posting on this ex-Scientology message board under the name I Hate Duplicity. Was what is the name that I used, right? And I'm venting and venting and venting. And I'm trying to kind of talk to her, but I know I can't just dump all the truth on her because she's just going to freak out and her family's going to freak out. And here's the thing. In the Church of Scientology, if you become an apostate and you start speaking out publicly against the church in any form, they're going to have a real problem with you, right? A real problem. And they practice a form of shunning. They call it disconnection. And there are labels that they put on people when they are in trouble with the church. And then the big label, the one that gets you in all the trouble, is when they call you a suppressive person, which is what I now am, right? And a suppressive person is defined by L. Ron Hubbard as an antisocial personality. It's a person who is, you know, your Napoleons, your Hitlers, your Christies, your criminals, your guys, you know, the people who are trying to do the world in. That's how he defined suppressive people. So you get agreement from Scientologists that even former family and friends, if the church says they're a suppressive person, they will disconnect from them. They will kick them out of their life. And they will no longer communicate in any way, shape, or form with that person if the church says they can't. That's the power the church holds over its members. And if you don't agree with the church on that, you'll be declared a suppressive person and you'll get kicked out. And it is emotional and psychological blackmail. No question about it. And once you've sort of given over to the idea that Scientology is the most important thing in the world, it's very easy to agree with this. And they used to do this more often. They don't do it so much anymore. But they would actually write a formal issue on yellow goldenrod colored paper. They call them a goldenrod. And they say, suppressive person declare. Joe Smith, right, or Chris Shelton. And they then describe all the horrible things you've done to earn being a suppressive person. And they post this on notice boards at the various churches. And so everybody can read it. They go, my God, Joe went off the rails. He's a bad guy now. He's speaking out against Scientology. He cheated on his wife. He cheated on his taxes. Whatever they say, you did. And it's always exaggerated. It's always half-truths. It's always nonsense. But they paint you in the worst possible light to convince all the Scientologists he can't be trusted. She can't be talked to anymore. And it doesn't matter if he or she is your dad or your son or your business partner or your best friend. You are to cut ties, no questions asked. And they will work you over to do so, right? They have people in the church who work on staff and in the C organization who are called ethics officers. And their job is to enforce the ethics of the group, right? And it's very formalized. This is not wishy-washy, sort of wondery sort of things. They have written, L. Ron Hubbard wrote, ethics codes of errors and misdemeanors and crimes and high crimes that you can commit in Scientology. And all of the high crimes are speaking out about Scientology, right? Or somehow betraying the church. You know, murder and arson and those kind of things, those take a second seat to, you know, what I'm doing right now. So the ethics officers will work you over, and if you're a business partner with Joe and Joe gets declared a suppressive person because he has gone down the rabbit hole of the internet or has somehow realized that Scientology is not what it should, you know, what he thinks it is, and he doesn't want to do it anymore, and he's telling, you know, if his business partner, Joe, or Bill, Scientologist, is like still hardcore believer, Bill will be worked over by the church to kick Joe out, to no longer be his business partner, right? Buy him out, buy out his shares, whatever you got to do. Joe can't be in your life anymore. You cannot be connected to him anymore in any way. No more Christmas presents, no more Christmas cards, no more birthdays. No, you know, if your kids know each other, guess what? They don't know each other anymore. It's over, right? that happened to me when Scientology found out that I was posting on the internet, even anonymously. They monitor those boards. They are the craziest organization. They cannot deal with criticism. And so they figured out from the things that I said who I was. And they called me up and they sent some people out from Los Angeles to sit me down and deal with me. And because I had, people's ear. I mean, people in the area in Minnesota where I was knew me. They thought well of me, and so they had to deal with me. And they convinced me to stop. And I said, okay, I will stop because I loved this woman who was my fiancée at the time. And I really wanted to not have that disconnection happen. I didn't want that to occur. So I tried to play ball, but while I was playing ball and there's a series of steps you would do in order to get back in the church's good graces when you've been a bad boy. And I was going to do those steps, and I started doing them, but they disconnected me anyway. And I said, okay, not okay. And so it was that a year later, December of 2013, I wrote them an email and I said, okay, I'm done. I'm not doing your stupid steps. I'm not doing this anymore. You guys have taken away the only thing that really mattered to me anymore, and I'm done. I would have played ball. I would have gone. And I'd still be doing it today if they hadn't done that. But here's the thing. Scientology is a draconian organization. They can't help themselves. It's in their DNA to act that way. And that's because L. Ron Hubbard was a pretty vindictive guy. He had a temper, and he had a vicious streak to him that didn't deal well with criticism. And so he wrote policies in the organization, into the DNA of the organization, that reflect that vindictiveness. And that's why the church acts the way that they do. Right? And by the church, I don't mean like every single Scientologist, would agree that what happened to me is okay, but the people who administer justice in the church are these Sea Org members, and they're hardcore. And when L. Ron Hubbard writes a policy that says if somebody breaks away from the church and somebody's criticizing the church, you are to investigate and ruin them utterly, which is exactly what he wrote. Right? He doesn't say get them to shut up. He doesn't say make nice with them. He doesn't say handle their problems. He says you ruin them utterly. Well, that's pretty clear, right? And so you might hear stories about the church hiring private investigators and stalking and harassing ex-members who speak out. That happened in Texas recently with a guy named Marty Rathbun, who was way, way high up in the church. They followed him around. I mean, they carried out a campaign of harassment at his house for like 6 straight months before they finally got him to snap and lash out at one of them. And then look at what he did to us, right? They're literally parked outside his house, following his wife to the grocery store every day. His wife was never even involved in Scientology, right? This is the kind of harassment that they do. I go on, Leah Remini puts a show out. I am speaking out about Scientology for quite a while. I go on her show. We have a short conversation on the show. It was great. She's great. She's really pretty cool lady. And the next day, up goes a website about me, a page about what a horrible, awful person I am, and how I'm a deadbeat dad and cheated on my wife and all this kind of stuff. And again, embellishments, half-truths, exaggerations, right? None of what's in there is the literal truth, but it kind of follows the truth, right? Kind of. But presented in the worst possible light. And that's now up on the internet about me. Anybody can find that, right? And I have to deal with that as a Scientology critic. But it's important enough to me to talk to people about this and let you all know what this organization's really about, that I deal with that. I go, okay, fine. They're going to lie about it. All that really happened as a result of that page going up, by the way, was I 3x'd the number of Twitter followers that I have, and my subscribers on YouTube went up above 10,000. So I was okay with that, actually. It was okay. Because people now know, over the years of exposure of Scientology, what they do, how they do it. And so when you're speaking out against it in a public forum, you tend to be looked at more correctly as, it's a rather heroic effort. And I'm not at all saying that I'm some kind of hero, because I'm not. But it is, and it does take an extraordinary effort to take on an organization that, if they really wanted to, you know, and put the time and money into it, could make my life very, very difficult, you know. So, so that's a chance to take when you do something like what I'm doing. But that's basically my experience with it, which I think kind of encapsulates a little bit of what the group's about and what they do, what they tell their people when you first get involved, and why people would get involved in that. To get a little bit more into the beliefs and whatnot, Scientology is all about personal empowerment, and the carrot is a big, strong carrot. I mean, people really want that. It's not hard to get people revved up about the idea of eternal salvation. I mean, all religions basically have that. But the thing with Scientology is it says, look, it's not a matter of faith. It's not a matter of belief. We have the exact scientific, figured out way for you to get from where you're at now to a godlike state. And we're not messing around. We actually have it figured out. And we promise that we will get you there if you do what we say. And you pay us the money to get there, right? That is what they're promising. And people fall for that. I did. I think you might get I'm not a stupid person. It doesn't have anything to do with how smart you are. There are doctors, lawyers, you know, candlestick makers. There's everybody who's in Scientology. It has nothing to do with what you know or don't know or your intellect. It has to do with appeal to emotion and appeal to authority. Those are the two main logical fallacies people fall into when they go for these groups. And this is, I've come to learn over the last 4 years after getting out of this. I wanted to say at the beginning, I'll say this now, obviously I am not objective about this subject, okay? I get it, right? I have biases, right? I'm the first to admit that. I am not telling you that I'm neutral about this subject. However, I will also say that as an apostate and as somebody who lived it, walked the walk, talked the talk, really believed, I feel that apostates are in a better position to be able to tell people like you what these groups are about because we were true believers, because we really do know what the mindset looks and feels and sounds like. And then when you come away from that mindset and you're motivated as a former member and victim of a group like this to learn all about it and then try to educate others about the dangers of groups like this and how the mechanisms that the group uses are actually very pervasive and all around us. They're used in politics, they're used in sports, they're used in employment in the industries, right? So in advertising, in the media, oh my God, right? Once you start seeing how these techniques work, you kind of like, wow, this is kind of very pervasive. The thing about the Church of Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard is he almost made it a science. It's been said among people who study destructive cults that Scientology is sort of the cult of cults because it has more coercive techniques. There's a lot of ways to put this, right? I mean, brainwashing it's a wishy-washy term, and it's not really a good term to use. But you start talking things like undue influence or coercive persuasion. High control groups, right, which Scientology definitely is. It's all about controlling every aspect of your life once you really get into it. The mechanisms, there are more of those control mechanisms installed in the techniques of Scientology than you'll find in the Moonies, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons. You'll find some of those things. I've done interviews on my channel with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or ex-Mormons or a woman who was involved in Bill Gothard's Christian ATI cult. And you find some of those mechanisms, some of those control techniques used. But in Scientology, there's like about 1,000 of them, all dispersed throughout the various techniques that are used, especially the counseling techniques that they use. So that's why I say, sure, I had benefits. Other people had benefits. I did some good things while I was involved because I was motivated to do good things. But I would never, ever, ever recommend that anybody go get involved in that group thinking that they're going to get the benefits and somehow they'll be good enough to not get the the bad stuff, because the bad stuff starts hitting you from day one. And it's pervasive. It's in the DNA of the group. It's not a thing where you can go in and sort of skim the surface. Scientology doesn't work that way. They're not going to let you work it that way, right? Once you get in, it's in for a penny, in for a pound, and they're just relentless and just try to get off their mailing list. They will, man. And I know how much work gets done on that because I used to do it, right? They skip trace you, they follow you, there are people who did. Okay, there was a guy. This is how bad it is. I was out doing the door-to-door, recovery work, right? I was out in Minnesota. And I go knocking on a guy's door. I had my list of all the people in Minnesota. There were like 900 people. Total nonsense. I mean, it really came down to about 50. But I had this big list of 900 people, and there was a guy on the list who Scientology thought was clear. He had gone all the way up to the state of clear, which was a pretty high level in Scientology, and he had been trained as a counselor. So I went, wow, this is a guy I want to get back. I go knock on his door at 7 o'clock at night one night. He goes ballistic on me. He's like, dude, when are you people going to leave me alone? And I go, I'm sorry, but you got to clear. I mean, come on, let's talk. And he goes, clear? Man, I bought a book at a swap meet 20 years ago. What are you talking about, clear? I never went clear. I bought a book at a swap meet. Right? And over the years, this had become altered to, this guy being a major player in the world of Scientology. And I was like, oh my God, I am so sorry, right? And off the list. Off I went. But this is, so even, there's so many things to say about this, but even the Scientologists think they're so much bigger and so much more influencing and so much more pervasive in society than they really are, because they're constantly fed false information at their gatherings and events about how big they are. They think there are millions of Scientologists. There aren't. I've seen the lists. At most, at their peak period in the late 1970s and early 80s, Scientology had maybe 750,000 people involved, total, over all the years since 1950. Worldwide. About 750,000, and I base that figure off of when you go into a Church of Scientology and buy a book or buy a service of any kind, even at a swap meet, they'll take your name and number, and they will make a folder for you, and they will put a copy of the invoice, and then they'll start writing you letters. And through the letter writing, they keep up on your address and this kind of thing, right? And they just work these lists. And that's called central files. And all the churches across the U.S. and internationally send those names up to a central database. Excuse me. And in Los Angeles, at one of the higher level churches there, they have a very large central files with folders for all these people, right? In the Los Angeles church and in one of the Sea Org churches there. And the number of folders that are there is about 750,000. So I go, okay, that's about how many folks they've had. And I also happened to hold the list in my hand one day of the International Association of Scientologists International Membership, and that is their membership group. If you're a Scientologist, you are expected to be a member of the IAS, and you pay for that privilege. And that list was nowhere near 1 million. It wasn't even 100,000. So, they'll go on, Kirstie Alley will go on to Howard Stern and say, there's tens of millions of Scientologists. And she thinks that's true because she's told that. She's a celebrity. She doesn't know. They go, yeah, there's tens of millions of members. Well, sure, we got all those files, right? Not even close. I went to Twin Cities on a whole recovery thing thinking that there were 900 Scientologists in the 5-state area around the St. Paul Church. I called all 900 of those names personally. We sat in a room. We intensively worked that thing. I went door to door. About 120 Scientologists, right? That was it. Over all those years, that was all we could find. So millions of members, no. They can't even fill up the Shrine Auditorium, and that seats 3,200. So, come on. So, yes, it is. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go into questions now because there's so many factors and aspects of this I could talk about, but I wanted to kind of give an overview of my own experience with it and then get into any questions you have about the organization, the structure of it, the belief system, anything. My book, by the way, is called Scientology A to Xenu. That's just a joke. It's just because Xenu is with a Z, right? Xenu is, for anybody who doesn't know, is a very important word in Scientology at the confidential levels. The lower level Scientologists, and basically 95% of Scientologists, have no idea what that story is. If you showed them South Park, they'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is nonsense. This isn't Scientology. Because you have to pay to get to a level called OT3. The confidential upper levels are called the OT levels. Remember I said a spiritual being is called a thetan? In Scientology, when you get to be a powerful thetan, you are called an operating thetan. You're operational, right? You know how to make things happen. And an OT is actually technically defined in Scientology as a being who is at cause over matter, energy, space, time, life, and form. So that's your godlike state. You are at cause. You are able to influence and make anything happen with matter, energy, space, time, life, or form. That's a fairly powerful state to promise somebody, right? And you're supposed to get there by doing these levels, kind of similar to, a ladder you climb, OT1, OT2, OT3, OT4, and at the level of OT3 is the South Park story, is the Xenu story, and it's if you buy into the idea that you are a spiritual being who lives life after life after life, you have a body, you live it, it dies, you go get another body, and then you live another life, and then you live another one, and if you accept that, then you accept that we have been living in bodies on this cycle for much longer than planet Earth has been around. And L. Ron Hubbard asserted that this universe is much older than science says it is. He said this universe has been around for trillions and trillions of years. And we've been playing this game of life for a very long time. So that's how he gets away with a story where 76 trillion years ago, we were all spiritually living in other places in the universe, and this guy named Xenu decided to gather us all up and bring us to planet Earth against our will by knocking us out and then blowing up planet Earth with a bunch of atomic weapons, and then horrible things happened to us as spiritual entities, and we've been stuck here ever since, and that's basically the story. There's a lot more details to it, but that's kind of it in a nutshell, right? And there are only through the special procedures of Scientology are you able to recover this information for yourself, get personal subjective reality on it, and re-achieve or rehabilitate your actual spiritual power and ability so that you can be at cause over matter, energy, space, time, life, and form. It sounds really, really wonderful as a thing, and I really wish it were true. But I know a lot of people who did those OT levels, right? And they cheated on their wives, they committed suicide, they got cancer, they died just like everybody else. So my statement at this point to the church is, show me a clear. Show me an OT. Show me one of these people who has these abilities that L. Ron Hubbard promised, because I never saw one the whole time I was in. And I will be the first to admit it took me way too long to realize, hey, maybe this isn't everything it's cracked up to be. But cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias are powerful mental forces. And I'm just going to say that when you're raised in something like this as a second-generation person, that itself is a whole nother cognitive force that acts on you, right? If it was good enough for my dad, it's good enough for me, right? So those were things that influenced my decision-making process, and it's the reason why after I got out, I don't self-identify on social media or on YouTube as the ex-Scientologist at large, but the critical thinker at large, right? Thank you. Because I discovered critical thinking, and I was like, oh my God, this is a subject. Carl Sagan, James Randi, Penn and Teller. I was like, wow, it was like a whole new world. And here were people who were not telling me how to think or what to think. They were saying, look, dude, just think. And I was like, okay, I think I will, And I started reevaluating all of the beliefs and systems and thoughts and things that L. Ron Hubbard had installed, and it's been a recovery process ever since. And so I am big on critical thinking, and I've not only talked about Scientology on my channel, but I've also put out a lot of content about how I've learned about critical thinking and try to teach other people about it. Not from the viewpoint of I am the guy who knows everything about it, but more I'm the guy who's learning and I want to share what I'm learning as I go. And so that's kind of what my channel has been. So
let's give Chris a big hand. Okay. For those of you who may want to be joining Scientology, come on up and okay.
Oh yeah, let's go down to Phoenix. They'll sign you right up.
Okay, I talked to you briefly about this David Pelly, if that's his real name. Pardon? Okay.
Yeah.
For those who didn't see it on Meetup, there's a guy named David Pelly who's been trolling Chris and this meeting. And is he sponsored by the church or just a volunteer? Does he think he's actually going to get people from a group like this to go along with Scientology?
I think he might think that. I don't know the man, so I can't say for sure whether he's church sponsored or not, but the way from the comments that I saw, which are the sum total of my experience with the guy, he sounds like an independent Scientologist. And let me just tell you guys real fast, there are people who leave the church as members but still believe in L. Ron Hubbard and his teachings. Even if they think that the abuses of the organization, they put that at David Miscavige's door and they still think L. Ron Hubbard's a great guy. And I think that this man who's been commenting on the Meetup channel was that. I think that's who he is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have one quick question. The one thing I didn't get from your talk is, if you're a member of the church, but you're not a counselor or on staff, you're just a member of the church, what does practicing Scientology on a daily basis look like?
Going to classes and or doing counseling, receiving counseling services. And also being talked to for hours on end to donate money to the International Association of Scientologists, because they have a status system within the International Association of Scientologists of patrons, patron meritorious, patron gloritorious, patron with honors, patron gold with honors. And the more you give, the more status you get. And status is a big deal in the world of Scientology.
Why did your college experience make you skeptical?
I went to college for 3 weeks, and then I joined staff.
Oh, so you didn't go to college, really? You didn't have a...
No.
Oh, okay.
3 weeks, yeah.
I heard that they treat the celebrities differently because that's kind of what all they've got right now?
Yes.
How does that work?
The L. Ron Hubbard in 1955 started pushing the idea of getting celebrities involved in Scientology, and he had some Hollywood connections with Gloria Swanson and a couple celebrities of that sort of status. In 1969 and 1970, they started an organization formerly called the Celebrity Center as a part of Scientology in Los Angeles with the specific purpose of getting celebrities involved in Scientology, because Hubbard said that the PR value of celebrities for Scientology is really, really high. And that actually worked out for them with John Travolta coming on in the 70s, Kelly Preston and his wife in the 80s, and of course Tom Cruise. They discovered the double-edged trouble with celebrities when Tom Cruise started jumping around on Oprah's couch in the 2000s, and people started correctly looking at Tom Cruise as a little bit nutty, which he is. I've actually met John Travolta. He's a super nice guy. His wife is really nice, but she's kind of hardcore, and Tom Cruise is just kind of nuts. And so the celebrity thing is now working against them, but for many, many years, it seemed to be working for them. Oh yeah, lots of money. Tom Cruise has given millions to the church.
How much is your book?
Oh yeah, let me tell you about this real fast. So my book is not a memoir. This is a critical analysis of Scientology. And so that's why it's called Scientology A to Z. It's $20. I wrote it as a series of essays, basically, covering the history of Scientology, who L. Ron Hubbard is, like from the get-go. The purification rundown I talked about, that detox program is covered in here. Their tax exemption, because they got tax exemption as a church in the 1950s, had it taken away from them in 1967 because Hubbard was found to be personal inurement, and they got it back in 1993, I think it was. I tell the whole story of that, how that happened, why it happened, and what needs to happen to kind of get rid of it. There's 3 chapters in here about recovering from Scientology, that, you know, from my own experience with that, which I think is useful for anybody from any group. And a lot of other stuff in here about how Scientology works, including a breakdown in a way I don't think anybody else has actually done of not just what's covered in South Park, but all those OT levels that I talked about. They're all detailed in here, and why Scientologists actually believe that they're saving the world through what they do. So that, and my story, of course, is chapter 1, just to sort of establish my credentials. So that's what this book is.
Okay, you were saying that you had dated this lady and you were in love with her. She was a Scientologist,
Yes.
as well as her family. What happened to that?
She disconnected from me, and her whole family did. And there were actually, I tried to engage with her 3 times, and she just turned her back and walked away from me, which kind of sucked after she said she would marry me. That was really harsh. Actually, it took me about 2 years to get over that. I just found out kind of randomly. It's not like I'm stalking her or something, but a friend of a friend saw on Facebook that she had gotten married. So she's obviously connected up with some other Scientologist, and I have moved on, and I now have a girlfriend that I literally just moved in with a week ago, and I'm very, very happy about that. So yeah, so life moves on.
Yeah, I have several questions.
Yeah.
You mentioned when you were growing up that you had friends at school who were not connected to Scientology.
Yes.
There is a lot of charter schools now, or kind of like parochial schools, where the school members, the students, are from families that believe in things. Do you know if there are any Scientology charter schools?
Yes, there are.
There are.
There's a school up in Portland, Oregon, called the Delphi School. They also have one in Los Angeles and one in Clearwater, Florida, that are private schools. You pay a lot of money. They're mostly staffed by Scientologists, and they teach L. Ron Hubbard principles, as well as the, reading, writing, arithmetic. It costs thousands, and so that's why a lot of parents will actually go work at the schools to get free tuition for their kids. And they have secularized some of L. Ron Hubbard's materials to teach it to kids.
And then also, what you're describing sounds a lot, I've known people who were in EST. It sounds a lot like EST, where the people doing the work aren't really getting anything, but they're pushing all this money upward to
Werner Erhard learned some things from L. Ron Hubbard in the 1960s. And he drew from Scientology. And in fact, Scientology calls EST and the Forum and any of those groups, they call them squirrel groups, meaning they've taken Scientology and altered it and delivering it in some other form, and they are down on those groups. And Scientology has actually gone after EST behind the scenes a little bit.
And then also I heard that at one point Scientology was taking people to court who criticized them, and they were like trying to destroy them financially by filing lawsuits against them. Are they still doing that?
Not so much anymore. And I'll tell you the number one reason for that is because in Discovery, David Miscavige might be deposed. And he ain't interested in that because he does not want to be put under oath in a courtroom. So they tend to not have the teeth legally that they used to have. In the 1980s and 1990s, Scientology was extremely litigious. And L. Ron Hubbard wrote in the policies of the church to use the justice system against critics because he said it's a useful ally in taking people down. The court system can be used for that. So it's a matter of church dogma. But after David Miscavige started doing things that he didn't really want to talk about in a court of law, the church has not been so litigious. There have been a couple suits, but they were brought against Scientology, not Scientology bringing them against people. They'll just hire PIs and stalk and harass you now. Yes? Oh, go ahead.
In Going Clear, Leah Remini, how you pronounce her last name?
Leah Remini.
Right. Talked about it was hard to get out, hard to escape. Oh. She mentioned it was very difficult to get out to escape, and it was a big ordeal. But you didn't mention it that way.
Well, I said it
And
took
her-
me 9 months to get out of the Sea organization, right?
I mean, she literally, with her body, tried to get out. It was the security and everything was monitored. She literally couldn't get away. So how do you address
that's
that?
what happened to me too. They ended up, because she was a celebrity.
And she had death threats too. Now.
Well, that could be, which may or may not be from the church. I can't say, right? But Leah Remini paid hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to cooperate with the church to get corrections made internally in the church because she was asking questions that you shouldn't really be asking. And Leah is a ballsy woman. And she saw things that she didn't agree with, and she said, this isn't right. I want to know why this is happening. It's not cool with me. For example, where's David Miscavige's wife? She didn't attend Tom Cruise's wedding in Italy. Leah did, David Miscavige did, other Scientologists did, but Shelley, David's wife, wasn't there, and she's like, where's Shelley? Leah was Shelley's friend. Well, Shelley's been disappeared. She's stuck in a mountain organization up in the mountains of California. And so she's been kind of hidden away. So Leah wasn't supposed to ask about that. And because she did, and because she was making noise about it, she was put into a kind of counseling session in Scientology called a security check, where basically you're asked for the things you've been doing wrong. Because Scientologists say that the only reason you're critical of the church or the organization or David Miscavige is because you've been doing things that are bad. It's a very introverting process. And this is all from L. Ron Hubbard, right? So she had to pay for the privilege of being asked what her crimes were, about $200,000, before she finally went, this is nonsense. I am not putting up with this anymore. She tried, just like I did, she tried to cooperate, tried to do the steps, tried to follow along, until she finally said, okay, that's it, I'm done. And she took months to arrange her family, her mother, her husband, and family members, and they all left at the same time. And that's how she kept her family intact. Right? I was lucky because my parents got out of Scientology before I did. But they didn't do it publicly in a big way like I did. They just kind of drifted off. And that caused me a little bit of trouble internally in the church. There were efforts made to get me to disconnect from my mom, but I resisted those. And successfully, because my mom wasn't making noise, wasn't out there being an apostate. She was just, yeah, I'm not so interested anymore. Maybe someday, they'd call her. She'd like, yeah, maybe. But really, she was like, yeah, no way am I going back. And when I left in 2012, I landed with her, and I had that support system to start with, and that was a huge, huge help for me. So that's what I know about Leah's story.
Hi, Chris. I wanted to ask you, why did you not include in the preface an explanation of Xeno? I searched high and low for an explanation of that word.
Yeah, maybe I should have put it in there. It didn't even occur to me that people with South Park and everything, I kind of thought, well, everybody's going to know what this is. That's probably my bad. I should probably put it in the preface. But it is covered in detail in the chapter on DOT levels. So it is covered in there.
Okay, that's the last question. He will be back there to sign books. He has a 1:30 flight, so we don't have a whole lot of time for him to get out of here. Okay?
Thanks, guys. This was fun. I really appreciate it. Thank you.